All right, so we're into week 4 of debunking Undercover Billionaire. Now, ran into some complications. Obviously, like I said earlier, you have to take your car to the mechanic because if you're driving Lyft or Uber, you're putting miles on your car. Now, as you're also doing that, you also develop other things. And so the mechanic was like, hey, one of your gaskets needs to get replaced. This belt needs to get replaced, so on and so forth. So that kind of put a hindering on the driving. So I had to find work elsewhere. So what did I do? I went and I tried to find work elsewhere. I applied online to a couple places. I got today I got an application right here to a gas station. And then I applied to a couple other places online. So, been a little bit busy because, well, I got to get the car fixed, so on and so forth. And I mean, hell, what else can I do, right? If I can't drive to work, well, then that's a problem. If I can't drive for work, well, then that's a problem. So why not get a job that pays well, right? And then apply some of my skills. So I figured, why not work at some type of restaurant doing magic or something like that? Because, well, that's what I used to do back in the day. I did it for Embassy Suites. I did it for a couple private parties and shows. And I think I'm going to be releasing an old magic video that I did. Who was it? I think it was Corporal Claude that recorded it for me. It was when I was in the Marines, so on and so forth. But I'll probably be releasing that and taking it off private and making it public so that if anybody wants to do like due diligence, like, did he ever really do magic in the military? Blah, blah, blah. Was his name Magic Mike and all this? That's one of the parts of how I got the nickname. But anyways, I'll go ahead and leave the link up after you guys see this video. It should be somewhere in the description for that video if you're interested in seeing the stage show that I did. It was pretty much a talent show. I think I won, I don't know if it was a speaker set or a TV, but there were different prizes. I came in second, so on and so forth, but didn't bother me. I ended up getting a free electronic equipment that I was able to hook up to my laptop, and I was able to enjoy movies. I am not a very, how do I say this? Some people want a lot of stuff. I just want my stuff to work and work well. And then, of course, obviously building up and everything like that with the TV show and stuff, people are like, oh, well, why do Undercover Billionaire and everything like that? You want to be a billionaire? Well, it would be nice to be a billionaire, right? And that comes with a lot of stuff, right? Because, well, let's just face it. Nothing in this world or life or country is free, and there's always a give and a take. Physics would dictate that, in life, that there is always a positive or negative reaction to every action. There is another positive or negative reaction. So if I were to if you've seen the Count of Monte Cristo, right? There's a priest in the video and he's sitting in there with Edmond Dantes and he's clinging the rocks back and forth together, right? Understanding physics, right? If this rock hits into that rock, then that rock moves forward, so on and so forth, etc. Now, same thing in life, right? If I put miles on the car, wear out, so on and so forth, things are gonna give over time. Perfectly fine. However, if that's your mode or your way of making money, then you're gonna have to adapt and overcome, as we say, right? So that's another saying from the military, but you have to adapt and overcome. We have to realize that we live in an adaptive system, right, that can be very complex. So, you have to be able to be versatile and to become a billionaire. I mean, think about it. Billionaires do more than just one thing, and entrepreneurs wear more than just one hat. When you're starting a business, you're the CEO, COO, CMO, CFO, CTO, CIO, whatever the case may be, with a CO or whatever the case, right? And that stands for Chief Executive Officer, and then, whatever. And the list goes on and on and on. But in week 4, we had a couple complications just because of, well, taking the car to the mechanic, then trying to apply to jobs, and then working. And then there was like periods where, I wanted to explore the city on my own without actually having to work. So I clocked out, so didn't work too much. I pretty much took it easy, focused on myself, enjoyed life a little bit, because let's face it, In the TV show, they only show you but so much of what happened during that time, right? Now, in the show, in the first season or the second season, right, I think Grant Cardone said that they told him to slow down because he was working too much or doing too much, so on and so forth. And he's like, I'm on a timeline, I'm on a schedule, so on and so forth, etc. And then, of course, you have Glenn Stern. That was the opposite, right? He was more relaxed and more confident in his ability, right? He could take time wherever, so on and so forth, and get back to it. But you don't see everything that goes on. Yeah, you saw him, doing stuff, right? You saw him going to getting the tractor tires and selling them. You saw Grant Cardone sleeping in a trailer that they were selling, the RVs or whatever. Someone else in that show, a lady, she went to the church and the church helped her out, so on and so forth. Another lady ended up taking the $100, getting a hotel because she needed, I guess, a bed or something like that, or a room. And that's another case. But then she eventually had to work, and she worked in this building that needed some work, and to trade off, hey, can I get a room here? I'll put in work to make this cleaner, a better environment, so on and so forth. And that's how I'll pay for rent, things like that. Think of it like a super in a building or something like that, right? So, or, if you go to school or college campus, they have the people that clean up the stuff. I forgot what they're called, but they would normally be like the janitors on campus and things like that. And to either study there or to get a discount on the tuition, they would go ahead and work on the property, and then that would reduce their tuition. So when they're doing stuff like that, those are ways to be versatile to afford education, because Harvard may have increased their, acceptance rate and made it more difficult because at a certain level, it's free to go there. I think it's like $100,000 or less, then you could go there for free. And there's a whole thing to that, which means that either you're going to sign in under your parents, and if your parents combine to make more than $100,000, which is like $50,000 each, then you're not able to, get that benefit. So you're going to have to actually be on your own, which is probably going to level up the mindset of a couple kids going to college, especially one like Harvard. Now, there's other things you can do, like, Class Central and stuff like that, if you want to learn and take classes. Now, when I was younger, I'm going to confess, because I was definitely below 13 because this took place in New York. But MIT, on, I think it was Napster or LimeWire, one of those, somebody released their online course, right? At the time, somebody literally recorded I think it was for Python. It was for Python, because I was doing MySpace websites for people to make extra money. And that was a whole lucrative business. But I started to, get interested into Python and things like that. And, coding was great and all, and you could do a lot of stuff. However, I did not have the time nor the patience to do it. So I think platforms like Wix and Divi and stuff like that made it easier to move quicker when it came to things like designing websites and just making it easier for the person that's trying to do something or build a site, the creative director or whomever, right, is trying to, put the pieces together when they're getting the information from, let's say, the chairman, the CEO, the potential client that, wants to do a website redesign, etc. But they want to use WordPress, and then, WordPress with Divi. Now they don't know what Divi is, and it's very confusing. And then, of course, if you say Wix, they'll frown upon it because of a branding issue, right? If a lot of people are on WordPress, which I think 70% of the websites are on WordPress, right, that are online, and only a handful are on Wix, well, what does that do to the brand? Well, it puts them in, a second position or third position, etc. I mean, look at Nike, look at Adidas, look at Puma, so on and so forth, right? And Nike's number one, right? And why is that? Well, because it's seen everywhere, especially in sports, right? At least in America. But if you go into, let's say, soccer, right, or football, actual football, because they use their feet to kick a ball, not their hands to throw a ball and kick every once in a while. That's very confusing. But If you go into football, you'll see that Adidas and Puma and what's the other one? Reebok, they dominate that space in that area, and that is played all around the world. So they're able to compete with Nike, that's normally operating in the United States on a big level, because, well, that's all the Americans see and experience. If they get out of their box, out of their home, out of their head, so on and so forth, and they travel to, other places, they will see these other brands, right? Now, I remember a story because, and I'm going to go into this because it's just a side tangent here. When Walmart was being built, Sam Walton actually got arrested in Brazil. They thought he was crazy. And the reason why was because he wanted to know what their grocery stores were doing differently in comparison to Walmart. So he was measuring the aisles, crawling on the floor, being very detailed, right? Trying to observe everything. Okay, so they do this and that, blah, blah, blah. And so obviously they were like, oh, this weirdo's making us uncomfortable. Can you get him out of here? And they did. And so his business partners that went to the jail were like, what were you doing? And he's like, well, in order to compete, you have to study your competitor. I mean, look at Michael Jordan, right? I think it's in the TV show Suits, where Harvey Specter talks to Mike Ross, and he goes, what was the line that he says? He goes, do you know who watches the most game footage out of anybody in basketball? And he goes, I don't know who. He goes, Michael Jordan. So on and so forth, etc. Right? Saw the most game footage. How do they move? How do they operate? So on and so forth. So when he got on the court, it was almost like Google's predictive analytics, so on and so forth. When you start typing, it kind of suggests or almost knows what you're going to say as you're typing, right? And the same thing, if you watch enough game footage of different teams and how they play and so on and so forth, you can tell when something is about to happen, which would make you a better leader or captain on a team, or if you played in the position of a point guard like Allen Iverson, so on and so forth, right? So think about that. If your job is to get the ball down court, but you're associating yourself with a team, you know their strengths and everything, but it really depends on where is everybody else moving. Yeah, they know the play. I'm not worried about the team. I'm worried about the opposing side, right? The opposing side is always doing something, right? And if you're able to anticipate, right, versus react, that's different, right? And it's up to the person that, is the head person or the captain or whatever, to have that ability. If you don't have that ability, then it's going to be real difficult. Now, going back to the whole Undercover Billionaire and WordPress and everything else, if you don't study other businesses, other ways that they operate, other websites, what makes this website so much better and different that brings traffic than this website? Do they use SEO? Yes. Okay. What about backlinks? What about, the structure of the site? Does it matter? What are their cookies look like, right? The cookies will tell you what things are tracking you on the websites, so on and so forth, etc., through their website, right? So if you design with Wix, you'll see a Wix cookie there, so on and so forth, right? If you design with WordPress, you won't see a WordPress site, but if you use like SEO Yoast, I think it's called, or a couple other plugins that they have, you'll see some of those things on there, right? Do they use Facebook Pixels? Do they use Google Analytics? And then of course, if Google's there, then what does Google Tag look like? And you should be able to see that, right? Or you could hit F11 and then look at the code there if you studied HTML, JavaScript, and all that other fun stuff, right? And I remember, this is showing my age here, but I remember when Flash came into it, right, with JavaScript and everything, and it didn't work out very well. So, when people are looking at me, asking me questions, I'm like, yeah, how am I supposed to beat my opponent if I don't study them, right? How am I supposed to understand my opponent if I can't replicate what they're doing in the outside world and see how it reacts, right? In comparison to myself, right? Not trying to be like somebody else, but to test the waters, right? Because think about it. If I'm gonna use the military because it's the one that I can associate the best with, right? If you were in the Army or Air Force, Coast Guard, whatever, and you wanted to beat Marines, well, you would probably study them, right? And vice versa. I remember when I was going through training, we went to an Army base to get trained. And it was funny because on the base, I'll never forget this. My boy Jordan actually did it. We're going to the chow hall, and they're supposed to be running around their nice campus or whatever. And this dude is supposed to be posted up, right? To have his rifle in the prone position, meaning laying down with his rifle and making sure that nobody crosses the bridge or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And he's asleep. He literally is asleep with the rifle in his hands, so on and so forth. And I remember Jordan literally looked over and was like, wake the fuck up. And then, of course, scared him, woke him up, etc., so on and so forth, right? And we would do certain stuff like that. And then, of course, we got reprimanded, and they're like, please do not yell at the Army guys, etc. We know you guys are Marines. We train differently. I said, you know, that's great and all. I said, what do you want us to do? I said, well, I didn't technically say it. Jordan said it. And I think he's an officer now. So salute to you, sir. What's it called? But he's like, well, what do you expect? You want me to trust that individual that is falling asleep on the job with a gun in his hand to protect us or whatever, because we're supposed to be working together and we're always studying everything, right? So we're supposed to be working together. He's sleeping on the job, probably does something else, so on and so forth, etc. But he's getting trained through SOI and the way they teach SOI, right? So, or their version of it. I think it's ATS or some crap like that. I have no idea. But, or ATC or something. I have no idea. But it's very interesting, right? He goes, how am I supposed to put my peoples and myself in their care and trust when they don't know what the hell they're doing? Why is he asleep? Why is he by himself? Where's the other person that's supposed to be watching his back? So on and so, and he went down this whole list. He goes, I know. And it's this Army guy, I think he was like a staff sergeant or whatever, but they all say sergeant, so on and so forth. And it's very interesting because they're not as specific with their words. So if you're a sergeant or E5 and above, everybody's like, hey, Sarge, what's up, Sarge, blah, blah, blah. In other areas, you're more specific. What's up, Chief? What up, Staff Sergeant? What up, Gunny? So on and so forth, etc. And there's a reason for it, right? Now, that was just one thing. But then we would do stuff like cadences. And if you ever seen a running cadence, we would go back and forth. And sometimes, you know, we had Staff Sergeant Towns, now Chief Warrant Officer Towns. You know, he would freestyle sometimes and do his own cadences, which was awesome. And I remember we were making fun of them. And we got in trouble for that, too, because apparently you can't make fun of the other branch while they're training. I have no idea why, but that's just, I guess, the generation that we live in now. So same thing in business, right? You know, there's going to be people that compete with you, you know, whether it's AI or Google or another marketing agency or another gig or another logistics company or another country comes in, so on and so forth. Or maybe there's aliens and now they want to compete with civilians and so on and so forth, and the humans, right? So on and so forth. I almost said Humani, but that's from the book Immortal Life of Nicholas Flamel, and I've been listening to it for quite some time now. But, you know, it's one of those things where, oh, okay, you want to compete, we want to study you, we want to analyze you, we want to look like you, so on and so forth, etc. And the only way to beat the opponent, or at least to be in a competitive space so that you could create what's known as a blue ocean, not a red ocean, which is marketing terms, right? And you could get the book. I think it's called Blue Ocean, actually. You could Google it. It might be on Amazon. If you're going into business, you should probably read that book. And it talks about things like how Nike and Apple created what's known as a blue ocean, right? The example I think I got from there or from someone else was when Steve Jobs added color to the PCs that he was creating, or the Macs that he was creating, the computers, right? So people were able to identify with the computers that they were, you know, going to purchase. It was more, you know, it felt more unique to them, right? Whereas everything else was like taupe or beige or whatever, or like if you go to a work and they provide laptops, they're all black laptops, like somebody who wears a black t-shirt all the time, etc. You know, and it's very dull and boring. Now, when he added color, people were able to say, oh, I want the blue one, I want the pink one, I want the Carolina blue one, I want the red one, I want the purple one, or the green one, or the yellow one. and it made people, feel like they were somewhat different while still expressing themselves and working on technology. Now, not to say that you need to do that exact thing. However, when you're going into business or going into the field, talk to people, network. I mean, I went to Startup Week out here, so on and so forth. I got to talk to people that were, going into AI. And one of the things, and one of the biggest things that I actually freaking figured out was, and it was pretty evident, is that when the .com error came, right? Everybody had a .com and they were trying to get money, so everybody had a website. AI comes out, everybody's building AI now, everybody's an AI expert, so on and so forth. But the thing that I focused on was not many of them actually know how to communicate with AI using their rhetoric, right? And I don't know if I said this in the first video or another video within Finding Freedom, where, every industry has their own language. So if I'm going to get into business, I have to know the industry, I have to know the language, I have to know the terminology so that I can speak correctly. I mean, when I moved from New York City down to North Carolina, I couldn't say words like damn or fuck or things like that. In New York, we're more direct, whereas down in the South, they say things like, oh, bless your heart, which is pretty much F you to your face. Now, if you don't know that, they get away with it, so on and so forth. But if you find out, then you could say something back like, I got a Bible to slap you with if you want to keep going, right? Because people don't normally read to understand. They normally read for entertainment. And as I said in another video, during the Great Depression, the thing that made the most money was entertainment, right? And bootlegging and speakeasies, but that's a whole other thing, right? Prohibition and all that. But, you have to look at the time we're in. What are people doing? Where do they want to go? And then what's their goal, right? So when you're looking at this, and for my case, with the marketing background, I always wanted to know, what was the entrepreneur or the business trying to do? Does it want to get more customers? Does it want to make more money? So on and so forth, right? Or clients, or whatever the case, right? What do they sell? Products and services. When I got to work for a company named Dentsu, I got to see how Atkins and Quest Nutrition, although owned by the same holding company, how they competed in two different areas, right? Because they catered to two different demographics. Whereas Quest Nutrition was a younger, more lively demographic, Atkins was for older demographic, meaning older people, right? So it's like, what kind of car do you drive? Do you drive a Honda? Do you drive a Kia? Do you drive, I don't know, a Subaru? One of these electric cars that they have out here, right? I think the new one that's competing with Tesla is called Lucid, right? And what's that going to do to the EV market, right? What is that going to do? Think about it. Right now, Elon has all this money because nobody's competing with Tesla, right? But Lucid came in and now they're competing with Tesla. So if that's the case, what's that going to do to the price point of the car, his stock price, and things like that? And if you don't think that somebody's doing something shady to either hinder the company or to stop them from coming up, you gotta really, really take the rose-colored glasses off, as they say, right? Because yeah, to become a billionaire or a millionaire, there's going to be people that are going to come after you. That's the competitive market. I mean, Sam Altman, I don't think he has all these good intentions, especially when he's competing, because if somebody built something better, right, or that can compete with him, or Google, or whatever the case may be, right? Look at what happened when China said, oh, it only took us $5 million to create this AI. They just gave a couple billion to this AI team that they, right? I think it was Larry Ellison, Sam Altman, and a couple of the other ones, so on and so forth. Why do we got to give them, $500 million or $500 billion or whatever, when they did it for 5 million, right? Now that puts things into perspective and questions everything, right? If Lucid comes out at an affordable, let's say they have an affordable rate, like when Honda came into the space, right? Their area was being a family car, right? Whereas, let's say Chevy, right, had the Camaro, right? Okay, that's great. Well, Honda had the Civic. It was still sporty and light, but it could also, support the family. Whereas the Camaro was a two-door, fast, so on and so forth, etc. And yes, the Civic has the SI model that, you know, has more horsepower, comes with the turbo and everything, but you can still fit a family in there. You could kind of fit a family inside of a Camaro, but it's really tight, you know, so on and so forth. But then there's other cars and brands like Dodge, etc., right? Then you have Mercedes, right? And so on and so forth. What happens, you know, there? Well, is that for the luxury people? That's fine. That's not our area, right? Honda has the family sector. Toyota has the family sector. Mercedes has the luxury sector. So you have to understand how these things compete and how people compete. Do you flash your Rolex? Do you like to wear your watch to tell the world, you know, you have money? Then that's fine. Others dress with t-shirts and shorts and sometimes wear flip-flops. It really doesn't matter, right? Now what matters is if you know who you are as a business person, right? And then how you're going to be received by the market. And the market would be the individuals competing and purchasing your business or your products or your service or whatever the case. And so there's going to be hiccups, right? You may get something, don't know about taxes, you get hit with a tax bill. You know, you start off with Lyft and Uber, now you got more, you know, maintenance costs, you know, as I mentioned earlier in the video to bring this back full circle. Now, you know, you can't always wonder or care about a lot of stuff. People may look at you funny. They may give you dirty looks. They may see you, let's say for this instance right now, because you can hear it, they may hear you recording and start their car, start revving their engine, so on and so forth, because they're just trying to trigger a button. Because remember this, and this comes from martial arts. Hold on one second, the car's passing, right? Hold on. So, you know, this comes from martial arts. You cannot fight with a clouded or upset mind, right? Anger blinds the mind and spirit, right? So if you ever talk to a fighter, you know, there's always been fighters that talk smack back and forth. I mean, you have Mike Tyson, Conor McGregor, you know, and all these people, and they'll talk smack back and forth. But what does that do to the other person? It gets them in an upset state. And when people are emotional, in a fight scene, emotional is just a translation to upset, they can't think straight. Then when they get hit, they get surprised. Remember, Mike Tyson said everybody has a plan till they get hit. Now, if you're already upset, now you're going to just try to take your anger out. Once you get hit, your plan goes out the window. And if your plan goes out the window and you get more agitated, more upset, so on and so forth, well, then you're going to end up losing the fight. Same thing in business and life and everything else. So this is why you have to know who are your people. Otherwise, a marketing term would be, who is your ideal client avatar, right? You know, your ICA. Excuse me. And then once you have that, okay, you want to sell to my people? Have fun. Try selling to them, right? Why? Why do you speak with so much gravitas and bravado? Well, because I'm confident in my product or service and what I deliver to the end user, right? How many people compete with Disney? Six Flags came out? Okay. Universal, but that's pretty much on Disney property, and everybody thinks that Universal Studios is, you know, something, but it's a separate thing, right? So, I mean, how many, yeah, Hershey Park, what's the other one? There's a couple other amusement park, Carowinds. They're not going to compete with Disney, right? It's it's like competing with Nike, right? But if you're able to cater to different people, let's say you start an amusement park for people that like anime. That's a completely different sector. And now you have a blue ocean that can compete with Disney, because Disney doesn't focus on anime. Even though they try to, they're not the best at it. So there's a strategy right there for anybody that wants to build, you know, the next Wizarding World or Universal Studios or whatever the case may be. And the same thing happens with everything else. So, you know, this is just a sum of what's been going on in the 4th week that I've been here. And later today, I'll probably work for a little bit, make enough money to not put so much stress on the car until I land, another job, so that I could get this gasket replaced and this serpentine belt replaced. That's going to be a pretty penny. However, it is what it is. You got to roll with the punches and keep going, And one of the things, and I want to leave you with this, in the show Undercover Billionaire, when they're doing these evaluations and everything like that, they don't tell you their credit score, right? Most people, depending on their situation, right? I have a crappy credit score. Other people have good credit scores. I'm pretty sure they all went in with good credit, right? Or social credit, or whatever it's called, right? So they had some leverage, but they didn't point that out in the show. I wonder why, right? Because if you have crappy credit, you can't go to a bank to get a loan. It's going to be real hard to talk to somebody to evaluate a business or to acquire something. Remember, they bought houses, they flipped houses, etc. That requires a credit check. In order to do a credit check, even if you have a fake name, you need to, provide a social and everything. And then, of course, you could go about your day if you have good credit, but they didn't show that in the show. Remember that. So those are the little intricacies that I pay attention to when I'm watching things, right? I had, someone that I, was hanging out with, let's just say significant other, till we separate, and she was like, why are you watching this? I said, I want you to see this and tell me what you see, right? Do we see the same thing? And I realized very quickly we didn't. First, she was like, this is not real. Check, I already know that. 2, I said, but do you see what they're doing? She goes, yeah, I saw this, I saw that, blah, 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 blah. Okay, what are you not? Okay, what do I need to put subtitles on? I'm not trying to be rude here, but you're not focusing in on the picture, right? It's like looking at a painting, and then the artist comes to you and says, what do you see in the painting or the artwork, right? And it goes, oh, so I see this and I see this. And they do this in psychology with blot tests, right? They put blobs of ink, so on and so forth, and your brain creates whatever. And there's like a cheat code for the psychologist that tells you what's the image or the correct answer or the 2 images that might come up, So it's what you see first, and that normally shows different signs, or at least supposed to tell the psychologist what the brain is more focused on. Is it focused on good? Is it focused on evil? Is it focused on this? Is it focused on that? So on and so forth, right? Do you see a tree, or do you see a lion? Do you see an ox, or do you see a wolf? Whatever the case may be, right? So this is what, you have to understand. If you're not paying attention to what's going on, this is why I tend to watch things over and over again, right? And it's not because I'm bored. It's because I'm missing something. The first time I watch something, I watch it completely through. That's normally for entertainment, right? Then when I go back to watch it, I start to focus on different parts of it. And then I'll go back maybe a week or 2 or a month later. Hey, let me check this out. Let me see if I missed something here. Let me go to this episode. One of the things I like to do is quote TV shows, whether that be one of my favorite shows, Hustle, which is a motley crew of con men that go after crooked individuals, evil bad guys, to see if they could take it as well as dish it. And in one of the episodes, I think it's episode 6, right? I forgot what season. I might be correct in saying it's the 1st season, or no, the 5th season, last episode. So, or they call it series. So series 5, episode 6. And it brings in the team that they got, so on and so forth. And if you've seen it, in the first episode, there was a crooked company that ended up stealing technology from another gentleman. He ended up doing his own thing, committing suicide. Yeah, it's crazy, but it does happen in business and in life. And this is why you got to be careful around certain millionaires, billionaires, and so on and so forth, because they'll do shady stuff. Look at what happened to Nikola Tesla, right? So in episode 6, at the end of the video, the people that were even there, were also in on it, that was supposed to be on the evil side, right? And Mickey's there and he's listening to this guy. They're calling him an ass and all this other stuff. He goes, I just have to ask you a question. If you knew all this and you had all this in place, why the dog and pony show and everything like that? Why meet me here, so on and so forth? And he goes, and miss this expression and moment on your face. And he smiles really, really wide, right? And when he smiles, does it look, oh no, I got it. So, sorry, I thought I looked like I had something on my teeth. But he smiles and he laughs, so on and so forth, with the team and everything, because the guy's like, you're such an ass, blah, blah, blah. And it was very comical because, you know, granted, he thought he was being sneaky on one side. The game was already done before the thing even started, so it was pretty funny. And then, of course, the guy that they had as a shill or as a outside person or whatever, that was supposed to be doing the money jobby thingy, whatever, he was getting played by the blonde chick character in Hustle, the new partner that replaced Stacy, etc., so on and so forth, right? And so it was this whole dilemma that happened, and he's like, hey, so what happened to the money? He goes, I gotta tell you something, she drove off with the money, blah, 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 this, that, and the third. So if you get the chance, watch it, right? But it's something, you know, that happens, right? And then, of course, I mean, The Count of Monte Cristo, one of my favorite books and movies, right? When Edmond Dantes, you know, he brings, who was it? Edmond Dantes and Fernan, right? Mondego, who betrayed him, right? So, and threw him in jail. That's like putting him in a mental hospital, saying he's crazy, or throwing him in jail, whatever, so on and so forth, etc. Same concept, right? But when they fast forward where Edmund now has the wealth and the tides have shifted, right? Ferdinand is in debt, so on and so forth. Edmund has, you know, all this treasure and wealth. And he finally gets him into a situation, and he does this to not only him, but another gentleman, right? And that's the police officer or the arbitrator or the attorney or whatever that was there, right? That also wanted to cover things up and sent them to prison. So he ended up bringing a carriage, right? Same scenario that they did to Edmund. And, you know, they left the gun in there to see what would happen. And the guy, you know, instead of going to the Chateau d'If, grabs the gun and he tries to shoot himself. And then Edmond Dantes comes up and he goes, do you think I was going to make it that easy? And that was one of the best parts in the movie. Now, going back to Fernan now in this whole debacle figures everything out. And he goes, because he thinks he's going to steal the treasure from Monte Cristo and how he works with the pirates and everything like that. And he goes to open up the treasure chest, and there's a chess piece of a king, right? And he says, kings to you, Fernan. And it was a thing that they had in the movie, right? And there was no treasure. And then, of course, they go through this whole thing. They fight, etc. Fernan ends up shooting the woman that he married that was supposed to get married to Edmund. And that's a whole thing. And it's this whole, you know, drama, right? But, you know, it's one of those things that in business, you can start off as the little guy, right? Think about this. What if Tesla, right, surrounded himself with a correct multitude of counsel that educated him on business? He would have never got screwed out of the $50,000 that Edison was supposed to pay him. His files probably would have never been confiscated and taken and, you know, put into storage or whatever. And the same thing you have to do when you're studying the people around you, right? If you're going into business, let's say you're going to be an influencer and start your own podcast. Well, what do they do to get attention? How do they talk to people? What kind of questions are they asking? And watch everything, right? I think Gary Vee says, watch what I'm doing, don't listen to what I'm saying, or something like that, right? And so when you're, you know, in that situation trying to compete, if you don't study, and not just one opponent, but all the other opponents that might be opposing you or working, you know, in lieu with each other, so on and so forth, because you got to remember, some companies are held by what's known as a holding company that owns a conglomerate of companies. If you remember, I said Atkins and Quest Nutrition was held by a holding company. So it was one big company that owned a bunch of little companies, right? And I'll get into that stuff later, but it's the way they work with money and asset allocation and things like that when they're moving money around. Now, these are the things that you should possibly ask, you know, ChatGPT, Google Gemini, have it educate you, right? Tell it to become a top business professional and educator in whatever industry that you're in, and tell it that its job is to teach you, what you need to know for your industry and business. Now, I didn't do anything too much with ChatGPT or Gemini this past week because I was pretty much problem solving, getting tires and all that fun stuff. And of course, finding out about the gasket, oil changes, and all that takes money, right? So how do I push back? How do I fight back, etc., right? Well, surround yourself with a multitude of counsel. Go to a bookstore. Read books of people that have done it, right? Educate yourself, right? Tai Lopez is famous for saying knowledge, right? But that also can mimic grammar school rock. Knowledge is power. Yes, to a certain extent. Applied knowledge is power. For if knowledge is never used, you will never be powerful. And then if knowledge is not passed on, you will not attain wisdom, because you have to see if it works, right? First, if it works for yourself, then if it works for others, right? This is your parents with children, right? And then if you want insight, if you last long enough and you become a grandparent, right? You now have insight to say something to the parent that will trickle down to the grandchild, right? So, it's one of those things that, knowledge, wisdom, insight, right? And you have to apply these things. If you don't, you'll never get to the next level. And I'll leave you with this quote for, those of you who may have criticized earlier in the video, why you're relaxing, so on and so forth. Why are you taking it easy? Aren't you building a business? Yes. But in the movie Van Wilder, Ryan Reynolds is in the movie. He says, you can't take life too seriously. You'll never get out alive. Remember that. So, till the next week, my friends, I will see you guys later. This has been episode 4, right? Episode 4 of Debunking Undercover Billionaire. So take care. Have a good one. Peace.